So it looks like Hezbollah is making a bit of a comeback, and not just in Lebanon, but here in the Western Hemisphere. Look, after getting hammered by the IDF, Hezbollah is now focused on rebuilding their capabilities and tightening their grip on power in southern Lebanon. And a key component of that is their expansive network in Latin America. So today we're talking with David Daoud, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defensive Democracies, where he focuses on Lebanon and Hezbollah. As a part of his work there, David puts together a weekly tracker of Israeli operations in Lebanon against Hezbollah. It's a huge help in trying to keep up to date on this subject. A link to that tracker and his profile on FDD will be linked in the description below. And with that, let's get to the conversation. All right, David, thank you so much for taking the time, sir. Looking forward to digging into kind of everything about Hezbollah right now.
Pleasure to be on, Preston. Look, Hezbollah, as most people may know, there was a war between Israel and Hezbollah that Hezbollah started on October 8th of 2023, lasted about a little over a year, November 27th, 2024. There was a ceasefire put into place just past that anniversary. And the drafter of the ceasefire was U.S. envoy named Amos Hochstein. I don't know if people still remember the name, but his goal there was to not just end that round of fighting, but to end the conflict once and for all. So Lebanon's negotiating on behalf of Hezbollah because Hezbollah is a terrorist organization that exists in Lebanon. Lebanon's a sovereign country. So this deal is meant to prevent the renewal of war anytime in the future between Israel and Lebanon. And that's been happening, right? Like Israel and Lebanon have their own issues aside from Hezbollah. But primarily over the past 40 years, the friction, the violence between Lebanon and Israel has been about Hezbollah. So the goal of this ceasefire deal is let's disarm Hezbollah. Let's get all the militias in Lebanon to be disarmed. Let's actually have Lebanon turn into a sovereign country, a country that controls its territory as it's supposed to. And the problem with that is that it just hasn't happened, right? We were a year out, and Hezbollah is not just not disarmed, it's rearming actively. We know this from claims by the Israelis, right? The Israelis, I put out a tracker in Long War Journal about every week. I think this week's update should come out today or tomorrow for anyone who's interested in checking it. And what you see is consistent weekly Israeli strikes for about a year now on Hezbollah personnel and assets, not just any personnel and assets, but also personnel and assets actively involved in the organization's regeneration. So Hezbollah is coming back, and these are the guys bringing it back. And so on November 23rd, this culminated in an Israeli strike in Beirut on Hezbollah's latest chief of staff, who both the Israelis and Hezbollah admitted was involved in this regeneration effort. So it's not just the Israelis claiming this. Hezbollah is admitting this. Syrian authorities, new authorities in Syria who are not friendly towards Hezbollah the way the Assad regime was, they routinely seize weapons shipments, funds destined to for Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the way I put it is, like, if we're being conservative here, for every weapons shipment that's seized, there's probably one getting through. But if we're looking at it realistically, there's probably five. Especially since Syria's authorities are new, they haven't consolidated control over the country, and this allows Hezbollah a lot of room to move. So Hezbollah is actively regenerating. They're not where they were, the 10-foot tall terror organization on October 7th of 2023, but they're moving in that direction. Right now, they're trying to stabilize their situation in Lebanon. They're bringing in funds. Again, we have Hezbollah admitting this, the Israelis saying this, media reports in Lebanon saying this. The only people that aren't saying it are the Lebanese government. The Syrian authorities are saying this, and there's little to stop them. So the deal, the ceasefire deal, had obligated Lebanon, because it is the sovereign country, because, realistically speaking, the IDF does not have the capability to occupy the swaths of Lebanon necessary. Right? The IDF's a small army. It's 500,000 soldiers plus including the cooks, rather, right? Not a big army. So it doesn't have the ability to occupy a country that is relatively, sizable, like Lebanon, for the period necessary, so for months on end, to disarm Hezbollah. This is going to have to be realistically Lebanon's obligation. And Lebanon, as the sovereign, is responsible for ensuring that its territory is not used by a terrorist organization to attack other countries. The problem is Lebanon has not acted in any meaningful way against Hezbollah over the past year. So this is facilitating indirectly this regeneration that we're talking about. And that brings us to today, where Hezbollah slowly but surely is coming back. We have ongoing Israeli strikes, and we have a situation that's combustible and I don't think sustainable in the long term, even if war isn't imminent.
So I do want to get into, we're want to talk about what they look like in South America historically and today, before that into kind of their regional aspirations and how that's changed. But to start there in Lebanon, you say this is the responsibility of Lebanon. I agree. Are they capable of doing that, though? They are. Okay.
So it's not, no, actually, well, it's not a capability thing. For me, it's always been a matter of will. And the reason why is that Hezbollah, right, we tend to misunderstand Hezbollah's relationship to Lebanon. So on the one end, you have the people that will say Lebanon equals Hezbollah equals Lebanon, right? The two are synonymous and identical, and that's an oversimplification of the reality. And the kind of the inverse side will tell you, no, Hezbollah are basically these Martians that descended from Iran and that have nothing to do with Lebanon. The reality is somewhere in the middle, in that Hezbollah is absolutely loyal to Iran, ideologically speaking, right? They abide by this idea of wilayat al-faqih, the idea that the vicar of God on earth is Ali Khamenei currently, and his orders are basically divine's orders. It's similar to how, the Catholic Church views, the papal authority. But at the same time, they are 100% Lebanese, and that Hassan Nasrallah, former Secretary General of Hezbollah, was a Lebanese citizen. Hezbollah's fighters are Lebanese citizens. Their supporters are Lebanese citizens. They are involved. They are, as a result, an integral part of Lebanon's political and social fabric. So they operate as basically a shadow state within Lebanon, the way that all of Lebanon's other sectarian militia / parties operate. So they're not unique in that regard, right? This is a problem with how Lebanon exists, in that its fractured identity allows for the rise of these subsectarian feudal warlords, right? The state is weak, it's fractured, there's no identity, that leaves room for these entities to come and say, what the state doesn't provide, we'll provide, right? And this is what Hezbollah does in Lebanon, specifically to Lebanese Shiites. Tells them, this is a historically disenfranchised community, historically on the lower end of the socioeconomic level. Hezbollah comes and tells them, we will be your guarantor of domestic political equality against the Sunnis and the Christians and the Druze who have traditionally disregarded you. We will be your vehicle for upward social mobility, right? They have schools that are excellent as far as Lebanon standards are. They have vocational training, right? They have this massive social apparatus. Again, they're not unique in that regard in Lebanon, but they're more proficient than the other groups. And will protect you against outside threats, namely, with their militia, Israel, and the Sunni Takfiris in Syria. So all this together attracts a broad swath of Lebanon Shiites who are not necessarily ideological, right? Pragmatic reasons. You have an ideological core, but most of Hezbollah's supporters, I would say, aren't ideological. They're for pragmatic reasons. And this isn't a negligible community, right? 85% of Lebanon Shiites, as far as we can tell, according to most recent credible polling from September of 2024, support Hezbollah for these pragmatic reasons. So if you're the Lebanese government, right, Lebanon Shiites we don't know exactly because Lebanon hasn't had an accurate census since 1932, but we can estimate that they're likely Lebanon's largest individual sect, and most likely the fastest growing. So this is a sizable part of your population. So, Lebanon's a functional procedural democracy. And the way it apportions power, I like to liken it to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So each sect gets a nook of power, right? So the army is divided up between the sects. And how do you decide which Shiite to give it to? Well, who's the most powerful Shiite party? In this case, Hezbollah and Amal, more so Hezbollah lately. So when you want to give up any political power, you want to give up cabinet positions, what have you, Hezbollah gets a share like everyone else gets a share. And because Hezbollah has a say in the Lebanese government and obviously influences its decisions. Conversely, if Lebanon were to go and disarm Hezbollah forcefully, right? So what they've been doing for the past year is asking Hezbollah nicely, will you disarm? And Hezbollah keeps saying no. So why don't they do it forcefully, right? If we were to get, and this is the issue of capability, right? The Lebanese always say, well, give us the arms, give us the weapons, fund us more, give us more. The problem is, even if you do that, we've been funding and training the LAF for almost 20 years now, since 2005. We haven't seen a single action against Hezbollah at any point. And this is because, again, that social support that Hezbollah has and the reasons for it. So if the LAF, Lebanese Armed Forces, were to be ordered by the government to go disarm Hezbollah, because of the way Shiites perceive Hezbollah, they would take it as an attack, a personal attack on their community, right? And Hezbollah has been feeding into this. They've been framing the question of disarmament as an existential threat to Shiites. So what you could lead to there is civil war, right? And that's the risk Hezbollah always plays with to deter disarmament. And that's why I would argue it's less a matter of capability, it's more a matter of will, because look, we don't understand this as much viscerally in the United States because
Yeah.
our civil war is 150 years out. Lebanon's civil war is still within living memory, right? There are people who fought in the war who are still there. What could induce a country to risk civil war, right? What could you give a country that's enough for them to be willing to take the chance with civil war? And that's the question that has, bedeviled us when it comes to disarming Hezbollah and has stayed Lebanon's hand for as long as it has when it comes to Hezbollah.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, one of the arguments being made to help with the dismantlement of Hezbollah while the IDF was going after them was kind of presenting to the Lebanese people, if you choose Hezbollah, you choose war. And it's bombs falling in your territory, and to a degree, it's troops crossing the border. So it sounds like that there's enough popular support right now to where that was not maybe the threat that it was intended to be. Is that accurate?
So look, I mean, where we look at it, polling, right, Lebanese sentiments, right, the same poll that I cited earlier shows that 70% of Lebanese overall, with the exception of the Shiites, don't want Hezbollah. But it doesn't matter because ultimately, if you hold that sect to which you're appealing, then the rest of the country, right? You're not talking about a unified Lebanon where one man, one vote is exactly the dynamic, socially speaking, at least. It's sect versus sect, right? It's sectarian interests. So insofar as Hezbollah retains that sect, ultimately, the way Lebanon works is it cancels out the rest of the 70% because the Shiites are such a sizable sect, because Hezbollah remains, again, degraded, but it still retains an arsenal that's powerful enough to confront the Lebanese. So, and then the calculus, right? This isn't David Daoud saying this. I'll go back to former Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdullah Abu Habib, who said this in January of 2024. The dynamic you're talking about, right? If you stay with Hezbollah, you get war. He said, fine, you know what? If we stay with Hezbollah, if we leave Hezbollah armed, we'll have a regional war. Right, that'll lead to regional war. And by what he means by that is, Israel will go to war with Lebanon. Now, what does that look like? Now, given the track record, it happens once every 10 to 20 years. It lasts for a couple of months. If we look at 1993, 1996, 2006, right? This most recent war is a war of attrition for about a year. But then the escalatory part of the war was from mid-September to November 27th of 2024. So that lasts about a couple months, this intense war, and it's localized. It's localized to the Shiite areas where Hezbollah is operating, right? So that's the regional war. That's on the one hand. That's the balance of pain. Let's put it on the left hand. On the right hand, if you pursue Hezbollah, and this is what Abdullah Abu Habib said, you go to civil war, and civil war never ends. And what does that mean, right? Civil wars, last 10, 20 years, or last many, many years. In the case of Lebanon, the last one lasted 15 years. If you look at Syria, it lasted about till 2024. That's about 13 years. And they're not localized. They're destructive. They don't spare anything. So the balance of pain for Lebanon is, well, do we leave Hezbollah alone and have this round of fighting with Israel every 10 to 20 years and it's just hurting the Shia, right? Or do we, butt heads with Hezbollah and potentially light the entire country on fire? And that's the calculus. And unfortunately, the Lebanese keep choosing, the former, this idea of leaving Hezbollah alone, even though, look, in the immediate term, it's not bringing the destruction upon Lebanon that, say, a civil war will. But Lebanon is a failed state at this point. And in part, look, I'm not going to say Hezbollah is the cause of the problems. It's a symptom of the way that Lebanon was built, unfortunately. But it is also the primary impediment to any reform necessary to turn Lebanon into a functioning state, because Hezbollah benefits from the corruption. And not only that, you see this in the municipal elections, for example. Hezbollah and its staunchest opponents in Beirut, in one segment of Beirut, rallied around each other to protect the sectarian system against independent upstarts, because they all these parties, whether it's Hezbollah or their enemies in Lebanese forces, view their interest in maintaining the sectarian system. So they're all part of the problem. Hezbollah is the primary impediment, and it realizes, right? Hezbollah realizes if Lebanon becomes a normal functioning state, there's no need for a feudal party anymore, this feudal sectarian party. So in the meantime, though, maintaining this system, again, Lebanon, failed economy, brain drain, terrible infrastructure, the country barely functions, right? If Lebanon is able to undertake a normal political process without some kind of hiccup that ends up lasting 1 or 2 years, it's actually shocking, right? So ultimately, you're slowly destroying this country and slowly draining it of any capability to become a functioning state, because you're not willing to, and I understand the Lebanese sentiments. They don't want to go to civil war, but you're ending up with rubble and ruin in either direction. It's whether you want to prolong the suffering or you want to get it over.
Jesus. Well, a part of this that I think is interesting is kind of the regional impact that Hezbollah had. And as the fighting was escalating between Hezbollah and the IDF, there were reports that, some Hezbollah members that were in maybe Syria or even Iraq were coming back home. And I feel like we haven't heard much from Hezbollah's presence across the region in the last year. What does that look like? Are they regenerating there as well?
Well, look, I think right now they're reconsolidating because their goal right now, first of all, I call it the playing possum strategy. They want everyone to think they're dead, because if your adversaries think that you're dead, then they lower the pressure, right? You hear Israeli officials talking about they're happy Naim Qassem, the new Secretary General, is the head of Hezbollah because they underestimate him. I think this is a terrible mistake. I think he's the right guy that Hezbollah needs right now, and this kind of goes into what they're doing regionally. What Hezbollah needs right now is to lay low. They want everyone to think they're down for the count, right? Because if they think they're down for the count, the UNIFIL actually put out a statement recently. There was Israeli strikes on Thursday in Lebanon against Hezbollah assets, right? The UNIFIL, United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon's UN peacekeeping force, comes out and says, these are a blatant violation of Resolution 1701 that occurred as Lebanon is disarming Hezbollah. And Israel, you need to avail yourself of the coordination mechanisms that exist to deal with this problem. Now, assuming all that was true, right, that Lebanon is acting against Hezbollah, that Hezbollah is down for the count, that the coordination mechanisms, right, Israel detects a violation, Hezbollah is rearming, they tell the Lebanese go and disarm them. This, Israel then has no right to strike, right? Except none of that is true, right? None of that is true at all. So Israel's right to continue operations in Lebanon is premised on two things. One, Hezbollah is regenerating. Two, Lebanon is acting. If Hezbollah can pretend it's not regenerating, if they can lay low, do this very quietly, then it obviates the need. In fact, it makes illegal these Israeli strikes. And if Lebanon can then claim we're doing our duty, then also because they're the sovereign, because the primary responsibility exists with them, then Israel is not entitled to take self-help measures within the context of the ceasefire. So this is the impression both sides are going to give, because Lebanon obviously has an interest in not being bombed, right? However confined that is. And Hezbollah wants to regenerate, right? Hezbollah wants to come back, and they want to do it with as minimal bloodletting as possible from their end. So I think regionally, they're also trying to keep their head low for the same reason. They're trying to let everyone think, hey, you know what? We're not rocking the boat. We're done. We're down. And what this allows is, again, people to drop their guard. Meanwhile, what they're doing, say in Syria, there's a report in MTV Lebanon. This is not the music channel. This is a news station. I think it was around the time that Senator Lindsey Graham was visiting Lebanon. I think the week after or something. It said that the Assad regime, ally of Hezbollah, allowed the country to just be a playground for the Iranians and Hezbollah. In fact, while he was in power, they really controlled the country, and he was the governor of the presidential palace in Damascus, not even all of Damascus, at their pleasure. He falls, you have this hostile authority come into power, right? The new Sharar government. While that's diminished Hezbollah's use of Syria as a conduit for weapons, the channels still exist again because the country is not consolidated. So they're laying low, they're using subtle means, and they want everyone to think they're down for the count. They're not trying to rock the boat regionally for this same reason, because they want everyone to think, the job is done, that Lebanon's doing the job, that Hezbollah's done, Israel stop bombing, right? That's their goal right now, to get the entire world to pressure Israel to stop bombing, and to make sure that in the interim, if Israel continues to bomb, that it doesn't lead to full-scale war, because that's the last thing they want right now, right? That would undo their efforts over the past year, that would potentially existentially threaten them moving.
Was an opportunity missed here? It sounds like we were talking about Lebanon or Hezbollah being on the ropes, and now all of a sudden it's about the regeneration and how they're laying low. And what you're describing sounds like they're well on their way to doing that. I don't know if it was in the last 6, 12, 18 months, but was there an opportunity there to actually remove Hezbollah that was not taken?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, the opportunity, when I look at the October 7th war writ large, right, kind of this multi-front war that Israel's been waging for 2 years, or was waging for 2 years. I think there were a lot of mistakes the Israelis made. I think when it came to Lebanon, though, this was their most successful arena. This was, I was a soldier in the 2006 war in the IDF, and for me, this is very personal, and I've spent, I do what I do because of this, and I've spent the past 20 years now almost understanding why that war failed. right? Why that war went in, the IDF went in with high expectations that Hezbollah would be done, right? There were very high aspirational goals, and they ended up not succeeding. And then the IDF spent the 18 years between August of 2026 and October of 2023 perfecting how it would go after Hezbollah. And we saw this, right, in terms of even the year leading up to the onset of full conflict. The Israelis did this masterfully from the perspective of building a legal case. Right. This is my other hat that I wear. I'm a scholar of or at least I studied laws around conflict in law school. So you have to have necessity and proportionality, right, before you can go to war. If you're attacked by an adversary, and necessity basically says, have you exhausted all peaceful options before going to full-scale conflict, right, before going to an escalatory phase? And the Israelis did, right? For a year, Hezbollah is saying we're not decoupling Gaza from Lebanon from Gaza. We're going to keep attacking from Lebanon unless Israel stops attacking Gaza. The Israelis go to the French, they go to the Americans, they go to every possible interlocutor that they can have with Hezbollah, with Lebanon, to say back off, and we'll back off. And Hezbollah doesn't. They maintain this, right? They don't immediately go into full-scale conflict. They escalate gradually after Hezbollah attacks on October 8th of 2023. So necessity tick, proportionality tick. And then when the war comes out, right, when the war actually happens, the Israelis structure it in such a way that it was, again, I would look at it masterful. The integration of intelligence with warfighting, going after the way I likened it was, imagine you're stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson in his prime. You don't want to fight Mike Tyson in his prime. What you want to do is you want to break all his elbows and knees, all of his joints. So he's still got the muscles, but he can't use them. That's exactly how the Israelis operate, right? They hit the leadership, they hit the weapons, they hit the Hezbollah's ability to, right, all this lethality that we heard that Hezbollah would bring to weight during this war, 1,000 rockets a day, nightmarish scenarios in Tel Aviv. They prevented Hezbollah from launching that, from being able to put that into effect, and then just decimated the organization, right? I think 75% of their strategic arsenal was wiped out. Nasrallah was killed. The head of their Radwan for the veterancy, right, on many levels that was taken away. So Hezbollah was at the weakest it's ever been since its inception. Right? I think this is probably the most degraded Hezbollah has ever been. Again, not down for the count. They could still put up a fight. If they wanted to go to war with Israel at the time, they could still do some damage. They could still do some damage with Lebanon. But on November 27th of 2024, that was the weakest that Hezbollah was ever going to be. And the opportunity wasn't missed by Israel. Again, the Israelis did everything they needed to. They ticked all the boxes that they failed to tick in 2006. The opportunity has been consistently missed by Lebanon, which again is the sovereign. It is the only entity on earth that has the responsibility, right? I don't think Americans should be going to die in anyone's wars or getting involved in anyone's wars, including our closest allies, right? We should not be doing operations on their behalf. We should not be doing their jobs on their behalf. This is why we help these allies, why we fund them, why we give them the capability to do so. We do the same thing with the LAF. What you hear from U.S. advisors who go and train the LAF is that this is a cut above, right? The Lebanese soldier is a cut above any other soldier they've interacted with in the Arab world. They're in terms of their capability, their willingness, their learning ability. And we see that capability in action when it comes to Sunni militias, when it comes to drug dealers. Where we don't see it is when it comes to Hezbollah, for all the reasons we talked about. And with every passing day, Hezbollah is getting back. It's not back to where it was, say, on October 8th of 2020, but they're stronger. So today, it would be much more costly for Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, to restrain Hezbollah, than it was on November 28th of 2024. Some of us have been warning since November 28th of 2024, the day after the ceasefire, don't take your eye off this ball. Press Lebanon to act now and act quickly, because with every passing day, it's going to become more difficult. And that's where we are now, unfortunately.
So Hezbollah is unique in that when you look at this axis of resistance out of Iran, Hamas is in Gaza and a little bit in the West Bank, a couple other scatterings. The Houthis are in Yemen. Hezbollah, however, has a bit of a presence here in the Western Hemisphere, which has kind of gotten more attention in recent months as we've increased pressure on Venezuela. What does that look like today? Is there any continued presence, support? Yeah, what do you think?
So it depends on what you mean by presence, right? Are they active in the same way they're in South Lebanon. Not necessarily. They don't need to be. For them, they've been. So what you have in Latin America, especially, is and this kind of accounts for why Hezbollah is different from these other organizations that you mentioned. First of all, it's further along in development. Right, the ideal for Iran is that all of its proxies would operate by Hezbollah, because this takes the pressure off of Tehran to fund these organizations. What the Iranian model is based on the fact that you're loyal to us as a proxy, as an extension, especially with Hezbollah, irrespective of what we fund you. So the money stops, the weapons stop. Hezbollah would still answer Ali Khamenei's call immediately because of this ideological imperative, right? Because they view him as the vicar of God on earth. So what this allows Iran to do is say, go develop your own means of fundraising. And this is what we see in Lebanon, right? Hezbollah has gas stations. They have, they're involved in land investments. They have their own banking system for all intents and purposes. They have clothing stores. So they have independent, licit and illicit means of funding themselves. And in Latin America, where you have this Shiite expatriate community that has existed, if I'm not mistaken, since the mid-'70s to early 1980s, right? People who escaped the Civil War. There's still, as any expatriate community, especially if you move in bulk like that, you have connections to the homeland. You want to pass on your traditions and your customs to your children. And you feel connected to what's happening over there. And given everything we talked about, what the Shiites in Lebanon feel that Hezbollah has done for them, right? In their mind, it's protected them against rapacious, murderous Israel. It's protected them against the Shiites, right? So you have this kind of this openness to Hezbollah. Hezbollah comes into this community, which has its institutions, which, a lot of these people are successful, and taps into that. They replicate their scouting system, right? They have scouts in Lebanon, the Mahdi scouts. They have scouting troops. And it's not just them, it's the Amal party also, which is the Shiite analog to Hezbollah, the more Lebanese nationalist analog to Hezbollah. But because they're Shiites, they cooperate with each other. So you have schools in Latin America that are either loyal to Amal and Hezbollah. This is in the tri-border region, especially between Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. You have scouts, you have mosques that again, these aren't just regular Shiite mosques. These are mosques that are imparting, they'll celebrate May 25th, rather, which is the day that Hezbollah claims it liberated South Lebanon in 2000 from the Israelis. So it's perpetuating Lebanese culture, but through the resistance axis lens, through the Hezbollah lens. And what this allows Hezbollah to do in Latin America, is on the one hand to fundraise, right? So, if you have a successful business in Latin America, and, we like to talk about the drug trade, we like to talk about the money laundering, we like to talk about all the nefarious stuff that Hezbollah is involved in. And what I like to say is we've never looked at Hezbollah's ledgers, right? Hezbollah's never opened the books to say, hey, look, we get 20, look, guys, auditing, right? We get 20% from Iran, we get, 30% from drug trade, and we get 5% from selling chocolate on the side of the street, right? We actually don't know how much Hezbollah gets from where, right? So when it comes to their funding from, illicit stuff, from drugs and all that, I think there's an emphasis on that, because if you'll excuse me for the language, but it's a little sexy, right? That's the stuff that attracts people's attention. Oh, the party of God is involved in drug trade. Except I think it blinds us to, the fact that you could have a successful businessman in Latin America who feels this connection to Hezbollah for all the reasons we enumerated, who goes down to the local Western Union, drops off $5,000. He's not on any, SDGT list. He's not designated at all. He's just a regular guy who's involved in otherwise licit activity, drops $5,000 or whatever the maximum amount that won't attract attention by Western Union or whatever, drops it off. And then OMT Lebanon, right? This is Lebanon's Western Union, or the branch, the franchise in Lebanon. Some guy goes and picks it up, again, otherwise clean hands, and delivers that $5,000 to Hezbollah. Right? Or did he deliver it to his grandmother? We have no idea. So this allows Hezbollah this channel of funding that no one can that's opaque. And if things are squeezed in Lebanon, right, you can rely on these communities that you have in Latin America, but also, if you're in Michigan, if you're in Canada, if you're in Australia, if you're in West Africa, anywhere there's a Shiite concentration where you can tap into those sympathies, right? Go prove that the guy who went and, and dropped off $5,000 at anywhere at a Western Union is giving it to Hezbollah. You can't. That's the whole problem with the model. So that's one end, funding. And I think they're probably relying on this a lot right now, because right now they need funding. They need reconstruction funds. The base that they depend upon, like I said, it's not ideological in Lebanon. they're supporting them for pragmatic reasons. And if you just brought a war upon the average Shiite villager in Lebanon for Palestine, right? Even if they care about Palestine, they hate Israel. No one wants to lose their house because of that. And that house stays gone for several years. You're going to start getting angry at Hezbollah. So you need the funding. The other part is recruitment. And, a former colleague of mine, Emanuele Ottolenghi, and I used to track Hezbollah's movements, again, all this stuff that we just talked about in Latin America. And what we saw is in several cases, a lot of the guys who were, if not born, at least raised in this, milieu in the tri-border region would end up fighting for Hezbollah in Syria. Right? So you have a recruitment pool that's untouchable by the Israelis because it's half a world away. And whatever the Israelis can do, right, it's pinpricks. It's even smaller pinpricks. Right? All the pinpricks that they're doing in Lebanon, Hezbollah is still able to outpace Israeli strikes. Imagine in Latin America. So you can recruit, you can fund, and it's untouchable. And that also gives them projection power. I mean, we have the cases of the 1992 AMIA bombing, the Israeli embassy bombing, 1994 AMIA bombing in Buenos Aires, right, Hezbollah assets, Hezbollah recruits have been arrested, and even in the United States and Latin America, spying on Israeli assets and American assets. It gives them the ability to project power when needed in the Western Hemisphere. I don't think they'll do it now, right? But it gives them the ability for 0 hour, if forever comes, right, to hit a soft underbelly like they did in 1992 and 1994. I don't think that's imminent. I think right now, again, what they want is to tap into the funding and recruitment, which is what they need much more desperately, and to keep things on an even keel.
A couple quick questions there. I remember talking to somebody about cartels in Mexico, and I kept trying to draw the comparison to terrorism, and he stopped me and he said, no, it's organized crime. That's the better look. So at the risk of oversimplifying this, would you say Hezbollah in Latin America is more organized crime or more terrorism, if we can even put them in those camps?
So I think Hezbollah, we see this actually in Lebanon, they do the same thing. So you have these Shiite drug families, right? They grow marijuana, they grow other different types of drugs, right? There's a Captagon drug trade. This exists in some ways independently of Hezbollah. Hezbollah had never come into existence. These things would have existed, but what they create is channels into Syria, channels, say, into Israel, right? You have, crime in the Arab-Israeli community in Israel is a massive problem. And the Israelis aren't looking at it as a national security problem. They're looking at it as a pure crime problem. But a lot of these, crime families in Israel, Arab-Israeli crime families in Israel, they're involved in drugs, right? And they're getting their drugs from Lebanon. But what this creates is a de facto channel. So if you're Hezbollah, you go to these drug families, they're too powerful for you to dislodge, and you're too powerful for them to dislodge. You come to a modus vivendi and you say, look, we'll help you with this. We'll facilitate this. We'll look the other way. What we need from you is that guy that in Israel, we need him to gather intelligence on our behalf. Also, we need him to pass on money to this asset that we're recruiting in Israel, right? And you give us a cut, right? So rather than being involved, again, this is where we like to overplay what Hezbollah does, but then we lose what they're actually doing, which I think is more dangerous, right? There's nothing, at least that I know of, in open source that shows that Hezbollah has been directly involved in the drug trade, that they're actually, it's Hassan Nasrallah signing off on the order when he was alive, or it's Tabatabai, right, counting the Captagon pills. That, what they like to do is to be one step removed. So in the case that these drug rings are busted, they're not affected directly, right? It's not their people that they've cultivated. It's not their veterans that are arrested. And it allows them to maintain this image of clean hands, which is very important for them in Lebanon. They can claim, again, with some degree of honesty, we have nothing to do with this, guys, right? So, but what they do, and we see this in Latin America as well, you have these existing channels, and these existing channels are not just about funding, right? Again, you can use them for intelligence gathering. You can use them, right? Drug cartels are very violent. You can use them to help assassinate someone, to help plan an attack. And you don't have to do the effort. They're doing all the effort. You just have to say, we'll facilitate this. We'll tap into it. We'll work alongside each other in parallel. And again, it becomes harder to pin it on Hezbollah. So I think, while it's not as, again, I keep using this term, it's not as sexy. It's not as dramatic as, well, Hezbollah is authorizing a drug trade despite drugs being forbidden. It's like they're willing to subvert Islamic law in order to engage in this drug trade. It's actually smarter, and I would say it has more longevity, and it's much more problematic in that regard because they're staying one step removed. They're doing the thing, but they're doing it in such a way where it doesn't touch them.
I think we have a problem. I speak for myself. Have a problem sometimes at looking at these organizations and thinking, stupid or underdeveloped. And the more you dig into them, it's like, no, they're so incredibly devious and smart, and it's wild. You mentioned Latin America a lot instead of specific countries. Should I read into that they're rather border agnostic, or are there ties with certain governments in Latin America?
So again, it depends. They have certain governments that they favor. There's a website called Al-Khanadik, which is a Hezbollah affiliated website. It's probably one of the more honest Hezbollah websites. And they have a list of all their favorite dictators. And occasionally Latin American leaders or whomever it is, right? Lula of Brazil pops up from time to time, Maduro. So they have a certain inclination towards, leftist, so-called anti-imperialist, anyone who's anti-American. Because let's understand this, right? Because we tend to, this is another part that we lose. Hezbollah is on the border with Israel. We tend to think of it, and Hezbollah wants to destroy Israel. And it's probably the only country in Hezbollah's ideological pantheon that's slated for destruction. So we tend to think then, mistakenly, that Hezbollah's primary enemy in Hezbollah's conception is Israel. It's actually us. It's the United States, right? And they say this. This isn't David Daoud saying this. This is explicit in their open letter, this 1985 manifesto that they put out, laying out their ideology, laying out their goals, and they call the United States the font of corruption, the head of corruption. And Israel, in their conception, and this has been consistent since 1985, is a tool and forward military base of our nefarious interests, of our wicked American, designs on the region. In fact, in the Hezbollah narrative in 2006, Israel didn't want to go to war, right? Israel was hesitant to go to war in Lebanon, and the United States, George W. Bush, Condi Rice, right? Because we wanted to recreate the Middle East, we wanted to create this, this new Middle East that we were talking about. We pushed a reluctant Israel into war in Lebanon when it was not prepared for it. So this is the Hezbollah narrative. So what Hezbollah wants, and this is why, when the Russia-Ukraine war happened, I'm not taking sides on this at all. I'm not getting involved. I'm just saying that the Hezbollah portrayal of this, officially the leaders were agnostic, but then if you go read the leadership was saying, well, this is America pushing the poor Ukrainians and the poor Russians to slaughter each other so America can come out dominant, right? But if you read the Hezbollah narrative, right, the media and all that, they were ecstatic over this. They were totally in Russia's camp because in their mind, right, this was another chip at the liberal international order, which America established in the wake of World War II on the blood of hundreds of thousands of American soldiers. Which, look, I think the world is better off for it. Again, I'm not an interventionist. I'm definitely not a neoconservative, but I think the world benefits and we benefit from having this international order that is guided by American principles. And, the problem for Hezbollah is that this liberal international order, this rules-based order that is based in American ideals above anything, that again was built on the blood of hundreds of thousands of Americans, it stands in the way of their aspirations. It stands in the way of them building their alternate civilizational model, which is the Iranian model. And what they want to do is chip away at American global hegemony. This is why they'll ally with countries. Again, this is a theocratic organization. And yet they're allied with North Korea. They're allied with, with Maduro, who I doubt really prays to God on any, so they're willing to ally with anyone. And you see retroactively where Naim Qasim writes about the Soviet Union, this atheistic regime, in favorable terms. Why? Because it chipped at the American international order, because that is the primary impediment to their global aspirations. So any leader in Latin America that takes an anti-American disposition gets favorability from Hezbollah. That's part one. Part two, who do they work with? Maduro. The Maduro regime for them has been a great friend, right? There have been reports for years now. So I remember a 2018 report, if I'm not mistaken, from CNN, where the Maduro regime was giving Hezbollah, it might have been 2018, might have been earlier, but that time frame was giving Hezbollah Venezuelan passports. Now they're fake passports, but they are passports that are created by the Venezuelan government, right? So for all intents and purposes, these are official travel documents, and they facilitate Hezbollah's movement throughout Latin America and elsewhere where a Venezuelan passport is valid for movement. And this will allow them, again, to do anything that they need to do, gather intelligence, gather funding, right? Move between different countries in Latin America. So, and again, this is because the Maduro regime shares this interest with Hezbollah of shrinking American global influence, of weakening the United States, of pushing the United States out of Latin America. So the way they look at it, and by the way, the Russians, I think the same way. This is why, Russia and China haven't designated Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. It's why designation of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization through the United Nations is probably impossible because of Russia and China sitting on the Security Council, because all these countries have an interest, right? Hezbollah, insofar as Hezbollah is strong, it weakens American regional influence, regional power, weakens our way of life, and indirectly it weakens our way of life at home. It affects our way of life at home. And this is good for Russia. This is good for China. This is good for Maduro. So you'll have all these regimes. Again, the Maduro example, the Venezuelan example is probably the most egregious and blatant. But I wouldn't see that Hezbollah is above working with any government in Latin America so long as, again, they share this antipathy towards the United States.
Smart. They've figured it out. And to your point, they're regenerating. They're getting back to where they were. So, David, this is incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for taking the time. Is there a good place for people to follow your work?
So anywhere on FDD, that's where all of my work is collected. I would say what I like to do, this is something I learned in law school, is to show and not tell. So my favorite product, even this is just me being a nerd, is my weekly tracker on Long War Journal of Israeli operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon. And what I try to do there is put a chronology weekly of everything, every single action, drawing on Lebanese sources, Hezbollah sources, Israeli sources, putting the picture together. What's going on in Lebanon whenever the Israelis are hitting in Lebanon? What are they hitting? Who are they hitting? Why are they hitting them? Who are these people? What are the Israelis claiming? What's Hezbollah claiming? And through that, you can see a picture. I have an interactive map. You can see a picture of what's going on in Lebanon and determine for yourself, is Hezbollah actually disarming? Is it on its way out? Or is this an organization that's coming back, even if it's coming back in hiccups and starts?
Incredible. We'll have all of that linked in the description below. David, thank you again so much for taking the time, sir.
Thank you so much, Preston. It was a real pleasure.
So thank you again so much to David for taking the time to walk through all that. You can tell listening to him. He's an absolute wealth of knowledge on this subject. So again, be sure to check out his weekly tracker on FDD that dives into Israeli operations against Hezbollah to get a better idea of exactly what's playing out day in and day out. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.